So, how many were at the morning plenary session? You were all there? Okay, so there are certain things that I don't want to make sure I repeat myself because it may be like, I've heard this before. So this session is about AI. Now, I'm not a trained coding AI expert, but I have been looking into this since ChatGPT came into our world back in December 2022, was it? And things have exploded completely. So what I wanted to do was share our experiences in life science dynamics and the fact that we're tracking things, how they evolve. Not much out there in the space of market access, pricing, and HEOR, but it's interesting. So that's why we wrote a white paper and we've got a survey. If you go into LinkedIn, please do so and respond. There are only 4 questions there, but it'll be interesting to see your experiences, particularly if you're from pharma, but actually it doesn't really matter if you're in service providing vendors or whatever it is, to get your perspective about your experiences and what you've learned so far. So let me kick off with this slide. For those of you who've been around for quite a while, HAL 9000. Do you remember HAL 9000? Yes? 1 or 2? Stanley Kubrick's film, Space Odyssey 2001? Way back. I would encourage you to look at that Arthur C. Clarke's vision. This is from the 60s, by the way. So AI has been around for quite a while. It's just the basics of what we now see is happening so exponentially. But actually, this film, Space Odyssey 2001, is worthwhile looking at because HAL 9000 was the supercomputer, what we call a supercomputer. We don't have that yet, by the way. It's all theory currently. What we have is the basic stuff. Even the large language models we have, what it does now is what we call the basic AI and generative AI, but it's not supercomputers yet. We don't have models that can think and behave like humans yet. HAL 9000 was one of those supercomputers. And then we have Terminator and Skynet. You remember the film from the 90s? Yeah, they were all super AIs that could think, behave like humans. So already, filmmakers and authors were thinking ahead, way ahead of the time about what's coming. And now that we are here, it's going to be very interesting to see how quickly this is going to all evolve. So I wanted to show this slide because actually it's not new, but it's happening so quickly, it's difficult to keep pace with what things are happening. So what I wanted to do in this particular 20 minutes odd is to firstly make sure that we are all on the basic level of understanding what AI is all about. I'm sure we all have experiences of having used some of the basic tools that already exist, whether it's any of the AI tools. Probably most people use ChatGPT version 5 now, or 4 or 3. Claude, Gemini, there are hundreds, 300-400 of these tools that are currently available. A lot of them is knowing which ones to use, and if you are using it regularly already for your daily work, it's about what we call prompts and how you write your prompts to be able to get the most out of these tools. And if you didn't know that, it's something to take heed of, because the way you describe and write the prompts will get the most out of what you want to get as an output. All right? Then I want to talk about a little on the actual use of AI and the tools and the technology in access pricing and HEOR. Very little out there, actually. And I know there's some of you here who are working in this space, and it'll be interesting to hear your perspectives. But what the future holds, I think there's a huge opportunity here. All right? So here's the basic. There's the definition. I'm not going to read through all the aspects in this slide, but the Oxford English Dictionary's definition is the ability to learn, understand, think in a logical way about things, the ability to do this better than we humans currently do. Okay, that's what AI is about. But as I said, it's what we have with AI is the basics of very structured data set using algorithms and models to be able to give you an output. All right, it is still fantastic, but it's not a superhuman being that it can think and do like HAL 9000. But it's coming. When? We don't know yet, but this is it. So if you look at this slide, it tells you what we currently have is the narrow AI, number 1. All right? Any of the LLM, the large language models, or the tools we currently use, and any one of them, and I don't know, who uses ChatGPT on a regular basis? All of yours, probably. But do you use any of the other tools, Claude, Gemini, and there are hundreds of others, depending on what is it you want to do, right? ChatGPT is very good at doing research on a certain number of questions, but there are tools that you can use to create videos and images, and from pictures into images and videos, and some of them you'll see already, and there's a slide I'll talk about making sure that you can tell the difference between using an AI tool output in Facebook, particularly in social media, that are really quite scary in terms of what it does. And the ethical considerations of that is going to be vitally important. So number 2 and 3, super intelligent AI is not there yet. It's all theory currently. But people are working rapidly. There are companies that are working, in this on a daily basis. That's why you hear news about whether it's Microsoft, Google, or anybody else spending billions trying to develop the next generation. Okay, so tools used today. Here you go, voice assistant. Whether it's Siri or even talking to your car as you drive to say, dial whoever it is. But the point I want to make is number 3 here, deep fakes. And I think now sometimes I see things in social media which I cannot tell if it's true or not. Particularly I follow F1, Formula 1 racing quite closely. And every day I see little snippets of news in one of the AI, the social media outputs saying Lewis Hamilton, if you follow him, he's one of the great drivers, he's my hero. Actually saying he's now left Ferrari, now going back to Mercedes again, which is untrue, but actually it looks genuinely true the way it says he's going to be paid 150 million. I was just reading this morning saying he's going to rejoin Mercedes and be paid 150 million pounds. Not true. It's just made up. But you can, if you didn't believe and you completely put your trust on the AI outputs you see out there, you could pretty much be hoodwinked into thinking it's true. So you've got to be careful about it. But a lot of what we see now, and everything that we've done research, and we do this on a regular basis out there, is drug discovery and development. And just today, this morning, I was reading about, I think I mentioned it this morning, about a company that is from MIT, AI tool generating the next generation of antibiotics for your gut enzymes and your gut microbes to be able to identify which is the better antibiotic to develop for the particular type of microbe. Fantastic. And in fact, what it does is it cuts down drug development from 7, 10, 15 years into probably a third of the time or half of the time. In some cases, this is what you're beginning to see. And that is fantastic. It means quicker drugs for the unmet needs that can be met. Okay, that's all I wanted to say about the basics of AI, and hopefully we're all on the same page. So what we see out there is narrow AI, currently what's available there. It's the basics of what we use on a routine basis. It is not a super intelligent human being yet, but it's coming. When? We'll see. Right, so here you go. I think I touched on this already. From the 60s already, there were different models using AI in pharmaceutical industry, and today where we are in the 20s, is integrating various tools very rapidly into drug development and licensing. The spend, if you look at the top left-hand corner, is very interesting, and I think this is a gross underestimate personally. It's expected around 27, it'll be 22 billion, but I think it's going to be 4 times that in terms of what companies spend as they fully understand the capabilities that AI is able to offer in expediting drug development, but also in commercializing medicines. And that's the point of where we are today, is how can you use AI to make market access as a function, for instance, more efficient? And I've got some ideas. I'm not saying that's exactly what it'll do, but I think we'll be missing a trick if some of us didn't explore that as opportunities. The right box is actually giving you examples of some of the companies and things we've captured, which is in the literature, of how the different companies are using AI tool to develop, as I say, it's mostly, if not all of it, on drug development and discovery, which is interesting. But in the bottom left-hand corner shows you the expediting nature and making it more efficient in that development process of what it could cut down. And that means saving money, it means being more efficient, etc. So it's not surprising whatsoever that companies are investing a lot of time, effort, and money in this. Okay, but actually, what we have in commercializing, and particularly in market access, we're actually in level 1, aspirational, rather than going into 2, 3, 4 and becoming leaders. Some companies are more ahead than others, and willing to hear from our pharma colleagues here exactly where we're at. Certainly, my previous company, GSK, there's a senior vice president, Kim Branson, who was brought in, and he's been there for 5, 6 years. He's got a team of 200 people looking at technology and AI, particularly enabling. But what he's concentrating, and in one of the conversations I had with him before leaving, is actually drug discovery development rather than anything else. And I think when they've got that fixed, they may look at what else can be done in the commercialization, including market access. Right. This is a few more examples here, but the one at the bottom right-hand corner is something I picked up just this week, which is very interesting, Dalton TX. It's a discovery platform, which is almost like a brokerage, if you like, that is being offered to pharma companies so that they don't need to have a Kim Branson, with 200 people and spending billions, developing technology enablement tools to make better and faster, if you like, and more efficient drug discovery and development. So it's an interesting platform. Do have a look at it. I found it fascinating that they have this offering. I believe, when I looked at it, it's still quite rudimentary and basic at this level currently, but what they're probably wanting to do is partner with major companies to further develop and very rapidly this particular tool that they have to offer. But it's an interesting offering, and that you're going to see more of these examples coming through from service providers out there. Okay, and here's some more examples we've captured in a white paper that we published earlier, 2-3 months ago, and we'll be following with another one soon in November with what else we found in the last 6 months. But the one I wanted to focus on and touch on this a bit later is number 2. It's a company that we're speaking to closely as well. Was any of you here at the World EPA conference in Amsterdam back in March? You were there, right? Europe is there, you were there, yes. So I also mentioned then that Okra was also present there. Okra has now been bought over by a big global company called Envision. And they had a tool, they still have the tool, which could predict HTA outputs over 90% of the time, apparently. So any HTA body out there, by utilizing their tool, could predict the success rate of your pipeline drug being brought through and how successful it'd be. 90% is pretty good, right? Of course, we'd like 100%, but 90% is good enough. When we bring drugs to market, my experience working in market access, for instance, GSK, is as long as you're 60% plus, in terms of your percentage of success, that is pretty good in terms of whether we're going to be successful in launching the drug or getting it reimbursed in a particular market. All right, so 90% is actually powerful. But what's interesting is they haven't done anything yet with it. So they're willing, if anybody's interested, to partner with any company to further develop it. But it's interesting. But the point is there are lots of other companies trying to do similar sort of things. And as I say, for us to trawl through the literature on a regular basis to find out who else is coming into play it's the fascinating thing. So what does the future hold? So here we are. This slide is my personal view. It's not saying you've got to follow this, but I think here are some examples of what the trends are currently. JCA, I touched on that earlier this morning. But reference pricing, international reference pricing particularly, and we're here in Europe, in Germany, and it's consistent, and it has been existing for some decades now in the 28 countries, how they internally reference each other. But did you know how many global markets there are that do international reference pricing? Because I used to head up global pricing in GSK, and it was a bane in my side, a real thorn on my side. There are 91 countries that actually formally or informally reference each other, including big markets like China and US to an extent now is coming through, right? With the changes in the pricing format that Trump wants to put into place. So the MFN, for instance, right, most favored nation pricing, it's another name for looking at how pricing is done in other developing markets, and therefore Trump wanting the same sort of pricing. So there are 90 plus markets, and for me, when I looked at China, although they haven't formally stated they've got a basket of 12 markets, and the biggest threat for China is looking at Turkey, which is one of the cheapest and lowest market ever because it's so well controlled, right? And that is a big threat. So if they're doing it, and some of the other developing markets in the emerging markets world, whether it's Philippines, Indonesia, with huge populations, 200-300 million plus, they are going down this route as well, and that is a big threat if you're in global roles looking at the implications for pricing. So my contention here, my proposition to you is, when you do international reference pricing, and I, in fact, supported development of a huge tool for any product on a regular basis, particularly for a new drug to launch, you've got to, for launch sequencing, be able to understand the implications of launching in a market that has low price. You'd never launch in Turkey or UK, for that matter, because the prices are so controlled and low, right? That's why it's not rocket science. We launch in US because it's free pricing so far. That may be changing. Then you go to Japan, Germany, etc. for that reason. When you do waves of launches, it's for that reason of that implications for international play. So when you talk about wave one launches, right, it's those markets that are free pricing or premium pricing. But even Germany may be changing that. It's reduced to 6 months now. You can have free pricing, then you've got to present your evidence to be able to maintain your pricing. So the world is evolving rapidly, and I believe these are the sort of areas where an AI tool, like the Okra one I mentioned, would be able to predict the outcomes. So if we talk about reference pricing, of those 90 markets I've talked about, you could model that in to say which markets do we launch first and why, and which ones do we not launch until way down the road to make sure that our value is protected. Right, there you go. Challenge, AI, solution, and benefit. Again, this is my view of where I believe, looking at everything, potentially the opportunities exist. So where there is evidence uncertainty, so specialist drugs, rare disease, oncology, where we bring products to market with probably limited data and evidence for good reasons. Cancer drugs, you've got to bring it to market as soon as your phase 1, phase 2 show it works, is efficacious, because patients die. And that's the reason we bring to market. You've got to be able to demonstrate that is better, potentially, than what the standard of care is. But with that uncertainty comes, what price do you pay for it? So it's not surprising most of these reimbursed markets warrant you to make sure that you collect real-world data, right? And you do what's in the right-hand side, complex MIA stand for, if you didn't know, manage into schemes or agreements. You have a scheme in place that you're going to collect data in the real world to show that what it's demonstrated in, for instance, phase 1 and 2, you'll be able to repeat it and show the same, that it works, it's efficacious, and it's safe. And it's cost-effective. That's the point for reimbursement purposes, okay? So I believe that's the benefit, where these AI tools, and, welcome views from our colleagues here from industry about, if I was still at GSK, this is what I would do now, leading a global team, is to be able to explore these opportunities to say, I need to work with a company to see if they can help me do this better than I've got 40 analysts in Delhi who's doing this for me now, to see if they can do it much quicker but at a cheaper cost, right? And some practical cases here. So this is a bit more riding on the previous slide about what can be done to be able to model and get some outputs. Come in, please. I'll pick on you now to ask some questions. Right, here's a little vignette about the Okra tool that I talked about earlier. I just wanted to show you faster pricing submissions and better risk management and dossier tailing. One of the interesting things I'm finding with a number of companies is, do you know how much, well, you should know, if some of you are from global roles, how much you spend on developing a GVD, a global value dossier, for a particular product to bring to market? Typically, give me a figure. 200, 300? Yeah, $200,000+, right? Very expensive, And if you get, and I always say, actually, are GVDs actually used? So there you go. So why do global teams still produce GVDs? And we throw it to the markets and regions and say, hopefully it'll stick and they'll make use of it. But when I worked in the local affiliate in the UK, it wasn't appropriate for the UK market, so we'd have to do our own stuff anyway. So it's an interesting question I ask global teams now to say, why do you still do it? If you need to do it, use an AI tool to be able to maybe make it more efficient, less costly, and less time. Agency like ours would probably spend 3-4 months developing a GVD, but actually if it can be done in a week or less time, using an AI tool, wouldn't that be wonderful? Save you a lot of money. Come and work with us in Life Science Dynamics. We'll show you how to do that. Okay, so, but there's always a but. There are challenges, and I don't want to belittle this because it seems like it's a magic bullet, and it ain't. And you've got to be very careful about how it's used. And if you have been using ChatGPT, for instance, or any of the AI other tools, being the experience come into play here, 'cause some of the stuff you get from as outputs is what they call hallucinations. They make things up. But if you didn't have experience of having lived through launching many drugs or sold many drugs or marketed many drugs in whatever function you're in, then how would you know what the output is true or not? And that's where I think the human intervention is absolutely necessary. So you've got the word of caution about saying, just be careful. Yes, AI tools are there. They are an enabler, but they're not a replacer for everything we currently do. And I don't know if we'll ever be to that extent, but if it just services about 40-50% of what we do and make it more efficient, that is a plus for me in my books. So of all the things here that are challenges, I touched on earlier about the ethical considerations. You just have to be careful, and part of what different, I guess, government policymakers are looking at is what are the guardrails you've got to put into place about whether a drug development and submission into their system has the right outputs, using technology like an AI tool. Okay, forget that one. So here's an action plan, and I'm proposing to my pharma colleagues here. I think it's worth exploring some of these opportunities if you haven't. I touched as a specific example international reference pricing. That for me, it's a must. Some people pay more attention to it than others, I find, from my experience. But I think IRP, if you don't get that right, you lose a lot of value. All right, and making sure that you can launch sequence properly and protect. It's not only about value creation, but it's also protection. So how do you actually use an IRP as a tool to be able to manipulate your prices? The previous, you talked about the previous speaker. Is he gone? He's gone. All right, he's gone. He was talked about being agile. So part of what I did to do in GSK, although it's a big super tanker, is to use the IRP tool to modulate prices in different countries. So, and I'll give an example. What I did with one SKU of paracetamol in Malta, I changed the price and dropped it. And because Turkey was referencing as the lowest price for Malta, it generated £3 more million in Turkey. So that's the sort of thing, value creation is just as well. All right. And I think this is where an AI tool can identify those opportunities and create that value for you. And generating 3 million is a great plus, I can tell you that, And part of my role was to protect about 200 million pounds of GSK's assets by doing just that, using the IRP tool itself. So here are some things. And if some of you working in JCA readiness already, and it's going to be converted, what's it, 2028, when all therapy areas will come into play? So I mentioned again this morning that it's happening. I think we're on the 8th product. The output hasn't come out yet in terms of the first asset being assessed. When that comes out, we'll exactly know how the process works, how the system works, and it'll be interesting to see when that converts into other therapy areas. Okay, so I did do this morning in my Mentimeter, because there are some new faces here. Would you mind doing a quick survey for me? Let me see if this works. Right, here we go. Are you able to see this as a QR code? Let me present it. Yes. Just a sec. There you go. If you just, yes, please use your phone. And 2 questions for you, if you don't mind. All right. We good? Thank you. We good? Okay, next question. That's good. Well, I'm pleased to see 0 for not on radar. That would be worrying, because we had 4, I think, in the morning session. That was 0 in the radar, which is kind of worrying for me, particularly if you're in a pharma company. But in market access pricing, I think there's huge opportunities. That's my take-home message is, and I've given you some user cases where I think it will be of greatest value if you wanted to explore it. And if you want to discuss a bit more, I know Rusha's got a session later on that I will be sitting on about where you might be able to work together to develop such a tool. Okay, that's me done. Thank you for listening. Any questions? Happy to listen or answer. Go ahead, Risha.
Thank you very much, Navin.
Thank you.
I can speak without mic. If everyone can hear me.
We can.
Yeah. So on your third point on the use of AI or outcome-based agreements, I have a question if you have like any use case, because outcome-based agreement.
This one?
Yes, third. Yeah. If you have any successful use case, and if you.
There aren't any that we have come across in the literature. It doesn't mean, like I said before, they don't exist. It's just nothing there that we have identified. And I would love to hear if there are companies actually doing it, although a lot of companies are doing MIAs and outcome-based agreements.
Yes, so outcome-based agreements, as I understand, is itself is a tricky, risk our payers would like to stay away from that because it's itself difficult to track outcome-based agreements.
Yeah.
And then use of AI. So AI is also generally for payers is kind of a black box. So I know theoretically it makes sense, but it would be very interesting if someone has done something in this direction.
Yeah, so my response and if I were in pharma still, what I would say is it's no different from when we launch a drug in a new disease area. You have to create that awareness and educate prescribers particularly, but payers as well. It's the same with something. I used to go around different parts of the world because the payers were interested in managed entry agreements and particularly outcomes. What they didn't know is, what does that mean? What do we have to do? So if the burden is, if the company needs to go down this route because that's the only way to get the product into the market in the best optimal way, then what you've got to do is lessen that burden for the payer. If the payer has to administer, has to look after, tracking the outcomes, collect data, all of that stuff, there's the problem. That's why they prefer not to go down that route and just prefer a financial type MIA, which is just give us a discount. But we don't want that, you see. And if you want to go the other route, which is all the outcome-based agreements, then you've got to go through that routine of putting in the effort and working alongside the payer to lessen the burden. Then I think it'll work. Yeah? Please.
I have a question on the using AI for the GDD, which we have tried also in our company.
Right.
Piloting this also, but usually the cost of that pilot is more than developing it.
Right.
When do you think that this can, because I see the benefits like tailoring
Yeah.
price to the HEOR and tailoring to the, so that countries actually affiliates actually are using the GVD, but when do you think that the cost for using AI on developing a GVD actually will
Let's come to fruition. So you can actually, yeah. That's the $64,000 question. Because there are so many companies trying to do this, but I haven't come across one particular company that excels in it. Okay, so I mentioned one there, Okra. They have, and I've encouraged them to develop this tool, but they're waiting for a partner to work alongside. So it might be an interesting model for you, and we're happy because we have got an NDA with them. It is high, but think about it. I don't know what the pipeline in your company is, but if you're going to be launching 2-3+ assets a year, and even in the simplest sense, you're spending 200K plus, that's already more than $500,000. And if you can agree and take co-ownership of the risk with this technology company, to say we'll half the risk, then I think that's it. Somebody needs to break out of the mold. I'm not saying you should do it, but unless somebody does it, it's like who is the leader in all of this, and if they break through and actually first to market, that's the advantage. But there isn't anything, and I said this is, although it's been around since 2022 end of 2 years down the road, we are already seeing so many providers doing wonderful things, right? But not much in market access and pricing, not in the literature. There may be companies, I know Rusha in AZ is exploring this, and there are a number of others I know in colleagues in different companies, including GSK, trying to do their best. But it'll take, I don't think it's going to be years. I think it's going to be maybe a couple of years before this breaks out. And it's a question of, do you want to be the first, or do you want to be a follower? And that's the question. Yeah.
I think this is an excellent point to something which is regularly ignored, I think, when speaking about AI, and that is to what strategic purpose is it used. So there are a lot of solution providers that tackle or offer packages with AI from different perspectives to different levels of quality.
Right.
And you have that in the cycle of, strategic changes in the market quite a lot, where you have first the solution provider, but nobody cared really around the strategic problem identification, right? And how organizations can address the strategic problems if they come from the inside, like the focus on efficiency, the external environment, pharma reduce prices, or pharma gets involved in showing evidence on how service delivery, right? And so you have the solution before globally the strategic problems have been really identified, and then exactly these questions come as you ask them. When is the division of risk? And maybe the strategic problem here is for consultancy agencies, right? How many GBDs do we need to write per year or give to clients that it is exactly for us as a consultancy agency profitable, right? Maybe it's not a question for Alexion. Maybe it's a question for you in order to say, which consultant do we use, right? Do you see what I mean? It's a strategic problem.
We're also repeating a lot, like in every country that has an HTA dossier, we're repeating a lot of that. Right?
For example, yes.
So maybe that could be...
It's kind of, which problem do you try to address? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I would just like to also add one point on that. I along with consultancy, I agree with you. The consultancy is like the opportunity platform.
Yeah.
But also, I think it also comes with the development of AI itself. So the level how generative AI works right now, it's still comparatively limited than what we want.
Exactly.
In the dossiers like JCA, the ability of AI to extract certain information. I'm also referring to the same project, I guess you are referring. It has been challenged to extract certain information in some format and translate it in another format for the AI.
Yeah.
So it will be maybe a demand created which somehow lead the greater level of generative AI.
Yeah.
So I think it would be like industrial effort from consultancy side, but also from industry side. Because one company doing it on itself is not going to generate a huge demand outside.
I think with that, there's another interesting question, and that is, particularly you introduced the concept of collecting real-world evidence data with the use of AI. I think this is the question of the perspective that needs to be looked at, and that is, what's the perspective of HTAs? If you present that data, right, I think there needs to be alignment, and again, a strategic agreement on what the problem actually is. You can invest as a pharmaceutical company quite a lot on AI to, collect that real-world evidence, to digest it. And if the HTA at the end will say, you're right, I'm not sure, maybe that created a bias, maybe the system wasn't educated enough, maybe your NLP system didn't work properly for that AI application. I think there's also, the perspective of the recipient of that.
No, that's fair comment. So let me give you a final response, and I think we do for the next speaker. Hannah, how would I put this in the nicest way possible? I think we are in early stages, all right? GVD probably is not a good example, but there are a number of areas I've touched on which the problem we have in healthcare is data is so fragmented, and AI tools need what's called very patterns of data that are set in certain ways to be able to, one, using algorithms to be able to pick and choose and put it into his model to give you the right output. But because the data, and if you look at pricing, for instance, what price are we talking about? I was talking to somebody earlier and saying, are you talking about net price, gross price, price to wholesaler, price to patient, plus VAT, tax, whatever it is? Unless you know, and we collect data in certain patterns. And that's one of the, one of the things we've got to be aware of is there are certain areas, if we actually, as an input, collect data in certain ways so that it becomes very readable by machines, for an AI tool, then I think that's the first starter for 10. So part of this is about, like we say, educating the system itself to be able to make sure when we collect real-world data, for instance, it's got to be input in certain ways that it's very easily readable and analyzable by machines. Okay, thank you for your time. Ready for the next speaker.
Thank you, Navin.
Thank you.